The convoy had been ambushed in the dead of night, and the world seemed to shake with the echoes of gunfire and explosions. She was lifted from the dust and rubble by two soldiers, her uniform shredded and soaked with blood, and her eyes scanning, every shadow as if she could see through the darkness. The SEAL medic approached, cautiously checking the perimeter while assessing her condition, and he felt an unusual tension in the air that made the hairs on his neck rise. She did not cry out or panic. Her breathing was steady and controlled as if pain was a stranger to her body, but her gaze was sharp, calculating, and full of silent commands. The other soldiers muttered under their breaths, assuming she was a frightened recruit or an unfortunate casualty, yet her posture suggested training beyond what anyone in the unit had ever seen. The medic crouched beside her, examining her injuries, while she kept her eyes on the horizon. Scanning every movement, the air was thick, with the smell of gunpowder and burning oil, and distant shouts carried on the wind, warning them that danger was never far. She whispered something almost inaudible, and the words were strange, yet precise, making the medic pause and look at her with suspicion, wondering if she was speaking a code or recalling orders from a previous operation. The soldiers around her exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or step back from someone who seemed untouchable, despite her bleeding arm and torn uniform. The medic noted scars along her ribs and forearms, old and faded, yet telling a story of previous battles that no ordinary soldier could endure. He wondered silently what kind of missions she had survived, while she made no effort to explain, only keeping her eyes alert and her body poised as if expecting another ambush at any second. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of burning vehicles and the sound of distant screaming that made the blood in his veins run cold. He glanced at the horizon, noticing movement that could be enemy scouts or shadows caused by flickering fires. She tensed and leaned closer to the woman, asking her if she could move or if she needed to lie still, but she responded with calm certainty, telling him to prepare a medkit and maintain situational awareness while keeping her voice low and deliberate. The soldiers nearby hesitated to obey because her demeanor commanded respect and fear. At the same time, her hand brushed against the medic's as she adjusted her position slightly, and he felt the strength in her fingers betraying the fragile image of her injuries, and he realized that he was dealing with someone who had walked through worse than they could imagine. She looked at him finally with eyes that pierced through the night, and he sensed a history of survival and loss that she had carried quietly for years. The distant gunfire continued in rhythmic bursts, and her eyes followed each echo with calculation and focus. He noticed the slight tremor in her arm and realized that the pain was real, yet she made no sound, as if silence itself was a weapon she wielded expertly. The soldiers who carried her in now stood back, watching silently, unsure of how to approach someone who seemed untouchable. And the medic felt a chill as he prepared to lift her onto the cot, while her eyes never left the darkened perimeter. The wind shifted again, carrying the faintest whisper of voices from the distance, and she turned her head slightly, listening and nodding as if receiving instructions from ghosts of the past. The medic tightened his grip on her arm as he tried to assess the extent of her injuries, but she flexed her fingers slightly, and the strength shocked him, leaving him to wonder if she had been trained to fight even while severely wounded. The other soldiers began organizing the area around them, noticing that her focus was unwavering despite the chaos, and the medic realized that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Soldier who had survived what most could not, and yet showed no sign of fear or desperation. She finally spoke softly, recounting part of the ambush almost mechanically, and the details were precise down to the smallest movement, and the medic noticed the vocabulary she used and the tactical terms that hinted at a background he could not yet place. The tent flap rustled suddenly, and everyone froze waiting for movement, and she leaned slightly forward, her eyes narrowing, and the medic felt the tension in the air rise as if they were waiting for an invisible enemy to strike. The soldiers nearby clutched their weapons and glanced at one another, unsure of what they were seeing or hearing. And she remained still, her body a perfect blend of pain and control, as if her mind could suppress everything around her, including the reality of her own injuries. The medic adjusted the tourniquet on her arm, and she did not flinch, instead, giving him a sharp instruction about the angle and pressure. That made him blink in surprise at her knowledge and precision. He had treated hundreds of soldiers, but none had spoken to him with such clarity and command while barely conscious, and the thought sent a chill down his spine. She then whispered, something again, almost inaudible, and the words seemed like a code or a warning, and the medic instinctively leaned closer to catch them, and the soldiers around them stiffened, hearing her voice that carried authority far beyond her appearance. The night air grew colder, carrying the distant sounds of conflict, and she shifted her weight slightly, adjusting her position on the cot, and her eyes swept the perimeter once again, as if sensing threats no one else could see. The medic noticed the tension in her shoulders and the way her body reacted to the smallest sounds, and realized that she was trained to fight in ways that went far beyond ordinary combat. He glanced at her scars again, tracing the lines with his eyes, and imagined the battles they represented, wondering silently what horrors she had faced alone. She looked at him finally and nodded slightly, acknowledging his concern but saying nothing more, as if words were unnecessary in a world where survival was measured by action and silence. Suddenly a shadow passed outside the tent, and she froze immediately, pointing toward it, and the medic followed her gaze, feeling the weight of anticipation fill the air as everyone held their breath, waiting to see if the threat was real or imagined. The convoy had been ambushed in the dead of night, and the world seemed to shake with the echoes of gunfire and explosions. She was lifted from the dust and rubble by two soldiers, her uniform shredded and soaked with blood, and her eyes scanning every shadow, as if she could see through the darkness. The SEAL medic approached cautiously, checking the perimeter, while assessing her condition, and he felt an unusual tension in the air that made the hairs on his neck rise. She did not cry out or panic. Her breathing was steady and controlled, as if pain was a stranger to her body, but her gaze was sharp, calculating, and full of silent commands. The other soldiers muttered under their breaths, assuming she was a frightened recruit or an unfortunate casualty. Yet her posture suggested training beyond what anyone in the unit had ever seen. The medic crouched beside her, examining her injuries while she kept her eyes on the horizon, scanning every movement. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and burning oil, and distant shouts carried on the wind, warning them that danger was never far. She whispered something almost inaudible, and the words were strange yet precise, making the medic pause and look at her with suspicion, wondering if she was speaking a code or recalling orders from a previous operation. The soldiers around her exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or step back from someone who seemed untouchable, despite her bleeding arm and torn uniform. The medic noted scars along her ribs and forearms, old and faded, yet telling a story of previous battles that no ordinary soldier could endure. He wondered silently what kind of missions she had survived while she made no effort. To explain, only keeping her eyes alert and her body poised as if expecting another ambush at any second. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of burning vehicles and the sound of distant screaming that made the blood in his veins run cold. He glanced at the horizon, noticing movement that could be enemy scouts or shadows caused by flickering fires. She tensed and leaned closer to the woman, asking her if she could move or if she needed to lie still, but she responded with calm certainty, telling him to prepare a med kit and maintain situational awareness while keeping her voice low and deliberate. The soldiers nearby hesitated to obey, because her demeanor commanded respect and fear. At the same time, her hand brushed against the medic's, as she adjusted her position slightly, and he felt the strength in her fingers betraying the fragile image of her injuries. And he realized that he was dealing with someone who had walked through worse than they could imagine. She looked at him, finally, with eyes that pierced through the night, and he sensed a history of survival and loss that she had carried quietly for years. The distant gunfire continued in rhythmic bursts, and her eyes followed each echo with calculation and focus. Noticed the slight tremor in her arm and realized that the pain was real. Yet she made no sound, as if silence itself was a weapon she wielded expertly. The soldiers who carried her in now stood back, watching silently, unsure of how to approach someone who seemed untouchable, and the medic felt a chill as he prepared to lift her onto the cot while her eyes never left the darkened perimeter. The wind shifted again, carrying the faintest whisper of voices from the distance, and she turned her head, slightly listening and nodding as if receiving instructions from ghosts of the past. The medic tightened his grip on her arm as he tried to assess the extent of her injuries, but she flexed her fingers slightly. The shadow outside the tent moved with unnatural silence, and the medic instinctively placed himself between her and the opening while the soldiers froze, unsure of what to do. The woman on the cot did not panic. Instead, she shifted slightly, her eyes narrowing as if she could read the intent of the darkness beyond the canvas. The wind carried a faint scent of smoke and gunpowder, and her nostrils flared slightly as she inhaled and exhaled in a controlled rhythm. Her hand brushed the side of her leg toward something hidden under her gear, and the medic noticed the deliberate motion but did not speak, fearing to disturb the tension that hung thick in the air. Every muscle in her body was taut, ready to spring into action at the slightest provocation, and the soldiers around them realized that she was no ordinary casualty, but a predator who had survived countless battles that were written in scars and silence. She whispered a single word, low and precise, and the soldiers stiffened, as if hearing a code that only they could barely understand. The tent flap shivered slightly as the shadow moved closer, and she followed it with a calm intensity that was almost unnatural. The medic leaned closer, asking if she recognized the threat, and she responded with a small shake of her head, but her eyes remained fixed on the perimeter. Her breathing was steady yet controlled, and each exhale seemed to measure the distance between them and the unknown figure outside. The soldiers who carried her in were now on edge, uncertain of whether to stay or run, but she gave no indication that she needed protection, only that she was ready to confront whatever came. She finally spoke softly, recounting a tactical maneuver almost from memory. That suggested experience far beyond what anyone could expect from someone in her condition. The medic listened in disbelief as she described how to counter a flanking move, and the precision in her voice made his blood run cold, realizing that she had been in worse situations than this, and survived. She reached slowly for the hidden object again, and the medic caught a glimpse of the glint under her vest. It was small but heavy and familiar to him from training, yet he did not dare ask what it was. Her gaze shifted briefly to the soldiers around them, and a silent command passed between her eyes, and their bodies reacted instinctively, following her unspoken orders. The wind shifted once more, carrying the faint echo of distant gunfire, and the faintest sound of footsteps that did not belong to anyone in the compound. She turned her head slightly and whispered directions so precise that the medic felt like he was watching a master tactician at work. Her fingers flexed over the hidden object, and she looked toward the tent flap as if calculating whether to strike or wait. The soldiers held their breath, sensing the tension, as if time had slowed around them. The shadow moved again, and she tensed every muscle in her body, ready to respond without hesitation. He noticed the scars along her arm and shoulders illuminated by the faint glow of the lantern, and realized that each mark was a story of survival. each bruise a testament to endurance and training far beyond what the eye could see. She finally spoke quietly, describing a previous mission in a war zone that had been classified and erased from public records. The details were precise and chilling, leaving the medic and the soldiers frozen with awe and fear. They realized that the woman on the cot had lived through scenarios that most people only imagined in nightmares. Her breathing remained calm, but there was a fire behind her eyes that spoke of battles survived alone and pain endured silently. The shadow outside did not move closer, but the threat hung in the air as if testing her readiness. She flexed her fingers again, brushing against the hidden weapon, and the medic felt the weight of anticipation rise like a storm waiting to break. The soldiers glanced at each other, exchanging uneasy looks, unsure whether to obey or freeze. But the woman gave no outward indication of fear, only an intense focus that drew their attention like a magnet. She whispered a series of tactical instructions, and the soldiers moved instinctively, responding to commands they barely understood. The tent seemed smaller and heavier, as if the walls themselves carried the suspense of what was about to happen. Her eyes flicked toward the tent opening once more, and she assessed the distance, the shadows, and the possible angles of attack. Her breathing did not change, and the medic realized that pain and injury meant nothing to someone trained to operate under extreme conditions. She shifted slightly, adjusting. Her weight and the hidden object became visible just enough for him to glimpse and recognize it as a specialized tool for survival and combat. The shadow moved again, and she stiffened like a coiled spring ready to unleash force if needed. She whispered another word, and the soldiers reacted instantly, drawing closer to positions she indicated with silent gestures. The tent flap rustled slightly, and her gaze fixed on it with unbroken intensity. She began recounting another mission, her voice soft, but each word precise, each phrase revealing experience in enemy territory and survival when all hope seemed lost. The medic felt the weight of realization press on him that this woman was not just a survivor, but a warrior, forged in fire and steel. She flexed her fingers over the object again, her eyes narrowing, and the tension in the tent was almost unbearable as everyone waited for the next move. The shadow did not step closer, but its presence was enough to heighten every sense in the room. She whispered again about a contingency plan, and her tactical knowledge left the medic stunned, realizing that her injuries were only part of her story and that the real danger and power lay in the mind that had endured everything silently. Wind shifted, carrying distant gunfire and the faint sound of voices outside the compound that may or may not have been real. She leaned slightly forward and pointed to a spot beyond the tent as if sensing a threat the others could not see, and the soldiers stiffened, holding their breath, waiting for the next signal. The medic looked at her and realized the truth that the room was not just treating a wounded soldier. They were in the presence of someone who had walked through hell and returned unbroken, and yet she remained silent about the full extent of her past. The shadow remained still outside like a waiting predator, and she tensed every muscle ready for action without a hint of fear. She whispered one final instruction to the soldiers, and a cold shiver ran down the medic's spine as he understood that whatever came next would reveal the true depth of her experience and the story she had carried silently for years. The shadow outside the tent had frozen in place, as if testing her patience, and she did not move a muscle. Instead, her eyes followed every flicker of light and movement with a precision that made the medic and the soldiers around her hold their breath. The wind carried the faintest echo of footsteps that did not belong to anyone in their compound, and she tilted her head slightly, listening as if recalling sounds she had memorized from past missions. Her hand brushed again over the object under her gear, and the medic noticed the subtle flex of her fingers that suggested she could spring into action at any moment, but she chose restraint and control instead. The soldiers around them whispered nervously, unsure of whether to intervene or stay still, but the woman on the cot gave no sign. Of fear, only an intense focus that commanded respect and unease. Her breathing remained steady and deliberate, and each inhale and exhale seemed to measure the distance between them and the unseen threat. She finally spoke softly, recounting a tactical maneuver she had executed in a previous operation, and the details were precise down to the last second, leaving the medics stunned at her clarity and confidence. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that they were witnessing someone who had survived far worse than any of them could imagine. And yet her injuries now were trivial compared to the battles she had endured. The shadow shifted slightly, and her eyes followed it instantly, analyzing angles, distances, and possible intentions, as if she could predict its every move. The medic adjusted the tourniquet on her arm again, noting her calm under pressure and the way she gave him brief but exact instructions that left no room for error. He felt a shiver run down his spine, understanding that her body may have been wounded, but her mind was sharper than anyone he had ever treated. She shifted her weight slightly, and the hidden object became more visible, just enough for him to glimpse and recognize it as a survival tool used in operations behind enemy lines. She flexed her fingers over it, and the tension in the tent became almost unbearable as everyone waited for what might happen next. The shadow moved again, and she stiffened her entire body like a coiled spring ready to strike, but she remained seated, refusing to give away her intentions. Her gaze flicked to the soldiers, and she gave a silent instruction with her eyes, and they reacted instantly, moving to positions she had mentally mapped out, and the medic realized that she had trained them without words for situations like this. The distant gunfire outside continued in irregular bursts, and she leaned slightly forward, listening to every echo and every footstep, as if she could identify friend from foe from miles away. The medic watched her and wondered what missions she had survived to gain this level of skill and control. And he felt a mix of awe and fear, knowing that her story was far beyond anything he could have imagined. She whispered a tactical command, and the soldiers obeyed without hesitation, moving with precision that matched her words exactly. The shadow outside remained still, but the air around it seemed to pulse with tension, and she tilted her head slightly, indicating another point of interest, and the soldiers turned silently, following her gaze. She adjusted slightly, her injuries seeming to ignore the pain completely, as if they were insignificant compared to the decisions she had to make. She recounted another scenario from her past, one that involved surviving behind enemy lines and rescuing comrades under impossible circumstances. The medic felt the weight of her words pressing on him, realizing that this was someone forged in fire and steel, whose past had been written in blood and survival, and not a single person in the room could comprehend the depth of what she had endured. The shadow outside shifted once more, and she tensed every muscle in her body, ready to react instantly at the slightest provocation. She whispered a single word, and the soldiers stiffened their hands, tightening on weapons, ready for whatever was coming next. The tent seemed smaller as the suspense pressed on everyone present, and the wind carried whispers from the distance that may have been enemy movements or simply the imagination of fearful minds. She shifted again, adjusting the hidden object, and her eyes locked on the opening to the tent, as if measuring the probability of attack and counter. She spoke quietly, giving directions for a maneuver that would only be needed in the most extreme circumstances, and the soldiers reacted instinctively, following her unspoken commands. Their movements were fluid and precise, as if she had orchestrated them all from the cot without uttering a single loud word. The medic leaned closer, noticing the scars along her arm and torso, and realized they told a story of countless missions and near-death experiences that had shaped her into someone almost untouchable, even in her wounded state. The shadow outside remained like a predator, waiting for her to make a move, and she waited silently, refusing to give it any satisfaction. Her hand brushed the hidden object again, and the medic felt the tension rise like a storm about to break. She spoke softly, recounting yet another encounter from her past, one that involved deception, escape, and survival against overwhelming odds, and the soldiers listened in awe, holding their positions frozen by the gravity of her experience. The wind shifted, suddenly carrying the faintest sound of a voice that did not belong to anyone they knew, and her eyes flicked toward it instantly, calculating its distance, trajectory, and threat. "Level!" She whispered another command, and the soldiers reacted immediately, moving to the positions she had indicated without a single spoken instruction. The shadow outside shifted closer, and she tensed every muscle, ready to act with lethal precision, if needed, but her calm control never faltered. Her breathing remained even and deliberate, as if pain and fatigue were irrelevant in the face of the moment. The medic realized that her injuries were minor compared to the capabilities she carried in her mind and body. She tilted her head slightly and gave a silent order to the soldiers, and they responded without hesitation, like extensions of her will. The shadow paused again, almost testing her patience, and she flexed her fingers over the object, revealing just enough for the medic to recognize it as a specialized survival tool. She whispered one final instruction in the softest tone, and the air seemed to hold its breath as everyone waited for the next move. The shadow outside had yet to reveal its intent, and she remained on the cot, poised, controlled, and unbroken, waiting for a moment that would define everything in the next instant. And the medic realized that whatever happened next would unveil the true extent of her past, and the hidden strength she had carried silently for years. The shadow outside the tent remained frozen, as if weighing the risk of approaching, and the woman on the cot did not flinch. Instead, her eyes scanned the perimeter, analyzing every detail, every flicker of movement in the dim light, and the medic watched her with a mixture of awe and fear. She shifted slightly, her hand brushing the hidden object again, her fingers flexing in a controlled manner that hinted at the deadly skill she had honed over years of combat. The soldiers around them followed her gaze and adjusted their positions, silently obeying the unspoken commands she transmitted through subtle gestures. Her breathing was steady, yet deliberate. Each inhale and exhale measured the distance between life and death, and the medic realized that she had survived situations that none of them could imagine, and that her injuries were insignificant compared to the battle-hardened warrior inside her. The wind carried distant echoes of gunfire and shouts that seemed both near and far, and she turned her head slightly as if listening to instructions from ghosts of missions long past. Her eyes narrowed as the shadow shifted again, testing the resolve of the woman on the cot, and the air inside the tent thickened with tension. She whispered a single word, almost inaudible, and the soldiers stiffened their grip on weapons, ready to respond instantly to the next command. The medic leaned closer, noting the scars along her ribs and shoulders, imagining the pain and survival each one represented, and the way her body moved, even in injury, suggested experience beyond reckoning. She shifted her weight slightly, ignoring the ache in her arm, and adjusted the hidden object under her vest, the faint glint catching the light just enough for him to recognize its purpose without her revealing too much. The shadow outside moved closer, and she tensed her body like a coiled spring, ready to strike at the first sign of aggression. Her eyes flicked to the soldiers, signaling positions and maneuvers they executed flawlessly, as if she had mentally mapped out the entire battle space without speaking a word. The medic could feel the tension pressing on him, the way every muscle in his body reacted to her focus and precision. She whispered another set of instructions, recounting a previous mission involving extraction under heavy fire, her voice calm, yet commanding the details precise and chilling. The soldiers listened in awe, as if her words carried the weight of experience far beyond what anyone could endure. The shadow shifted again, testing her patience, and she flexed her fingers over the object, revealing just enough to show lethal intent, but holding back the full truth. Her breathing remained controlled, each inhale and exhale a measured rhythm that contrasted with the chaos outside. She tilted her head slightly, assessing angles, distances, and possible threats, calculating every move before it happened. The medic adjusted her tourniquet again, noting her lack of complaint as if pain was irrelevant and strength was measured by composure and control. The wind carried whispers from the distant perimeter, and she turned her head toward them, instantly analyzing the source and direction. Her eyes glimmered with recognition of tactics and strategy, and the soldiers realized that they were witnessing someone who had survived countless firefights with unbroken focus. She whispered softly, recounting another mission that involved deception, infiltration, and survival against impossible odds, and the medic felt the weight of her words pressing on him, knowing that her story went far beyond what they could see. She flexed her fingers once more over the hidden object, and the soldiers stiffened, sensing the unspoken signal of readiness. The shadow outside shifted closer, testing her resolve, and she did not flinch. Instead, she tilted her head, calculating the probability of attack and the sequence of countermeasures required. The medic watched in awe and fear as she demonstrated complete control over her environment, her body poised, every muscle ready, her mind calculating survival against a threat no one else could fully perceive. She whispered one final instruction to the soldiers, and they moved with silent precision, adjusting positions and preparing for contingencies that may never come. The shadow remained still, but the tension in the tent was almost unbearable, her presence commanding respect and fear in equal measure. The medic noticed the faint scars along her arm, glowing slightly in the dim light, and realized each one was a testament to survival through impossible conditions. She shifted slightly on, the cot adjusting the hidden object, her fingers brushing over it with lethal familiarity. The wind carried distant sounds of conflict and the faintest rustle from outside, and she tensed every muscle, preparing for the moment when the shadow revealed its intent. Her eyes flicked toward each corner of the tent, calculating angles and distances, assessing threat level and tactical advantage. She whispered softly, recounting scenarios from missions long erased from public record, and the medic felt the weight of her experience pressing down on him, understanding that her injuries were a story only half told, and the real danger lay in her training, her skill, and her mind. The shadow outside made a sudden move, and she tensed instantly, every fiber of her body reacting faster than anyone could see. She flexed her fingers over the hidden object, revealing deadly intent, just enough to warn without disclosing the full truth. Her eyes flicked to the soldiers, signaling silent movements, and they responded instinctively, positioning themselves according to her mental map. The tent seemed charged with electricity as the tension built, the medic feeling the pressure on every nerve in his body. She whispered one last tactical command, and the soldiers obeyed with precision like extensions of her will. The shadow paused again, and the air seemed to thicken as if holding its breath, waiting for her next move. She tilted her head slightly, flexed her fingers over the object again, and the medic realized with a chill that whatever happened next would unveil the true depth of her past and the hidden power she had carried silently for years. The tent flaps shivered slightly as the wind shifted, and the shadow made a move that drew every eye, and she remained calm, poised, ready for action, in a way that left no doubt about her lethal capacity. And the room fell silent, waiting for the first strike that might never come, and yet the anticipation was almost unbearable. The shadow outside the tent remained motionless, yet the air was thick with tension, and she did not flinch. Instead, her eyes scanned every inch of the perimeter, calculating angles, distances, and possible threats. Her fingers flexed over the hidden object again, just enough to reveal her readiness without disclosing full intent. The soldiers moved silently following her unspoken commands, adjusting positions and preparing for contingencies that may never come. The wind carried faint echoes of distant gunfire, and she turned her head slightly, listening, her breathing steady and controlled, as if pain, fatigue, and fear were irrelevant in the face of the moment. The medic watched her and realized with growing awe that he was witnessing someone who had survived battles most could not imagine, and yet now in front of him she appeared both wounded and unbreakable. She whispered softly, recounting a mission that had been erased from records and extraction under fire. In hostile territory, her words precise and chilling, leaving the soldiers frozen with a mixture of awe and fear. Each phrase hinted at experiences beyond ordinary comprehension, and the medic felt a chill run down his spine, realizing that her injuries told only a fraction of the story. The shadow moved slightly, testing her patience, and she tensed every muscle ready to strike at the first provocation. Her eyes flicked toward the soldiers, signaling silent adjustments, and they responded instantly, moving into positions she had mapped out mentally, without a single spoken word. The tent seemed to contract around them as suspense pressed down, every breath heavy and every heartbeat echoing the weight of anticipation. She flexed her fingers over the hidden object again, and the medic recognized it as a specialized tool for survival and combat in situations far worse than this. The shadow outside shifted again, almost taunting her, and she did not react outwardly, only adjusting her posture, calculating distance and probability. Her voice finally broke the silence, recounting another mission behind enemy lines, a rescue operation when all hope had seemed lost and comrades had vanished. She spoke with calm authority, detailing movement, strategies, and escape routes, and the medic felt the magnitude of what she had endured settling like a stone in his chest. The soldiers around her followed every subtle gesture, silently in awe of the precision she commanded, even from a cot. In the midst of her injuries, the shadow remained outside, still just beyond reach, but the tension built almost unbearable. She leaned slightly forward and whispered another set of instructions for maneuvers the soldiers executed flawlessly like extensions of her will. And the medic realized the truth that they were witnessing a master tactician and warrior forged in fire and trauma. Her injuries did not diminish her control or awareness, they only hinted at resilience that had carried her through impossible scenarios. She flexed her fingers once more over the hidden object, signaling readiness, and the shadow made a movement that drew everyone's attention. She tilted her head, assessing threat level and tactical advantage, calculating the timing and sequence of response in fractions of a second. The medic could feel the anticipation building like a storm ready to break. She whispered one last command, recounting details of her previous operations, the kind erased from history files, and the soldiers followed instinctively, knowing without question that she was prepared for anything that could emerge. The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound of approaching movement, and she stiffened every muscle ready to act instantly at the first sign of danger. Her eyes flicked from the shadow to the perimeter and back, calculating probabilities and contingencies with exacting precision. The medic realized that her injuries were a story only half told, and that the real strength lay in her mind and body and experience. She shifted slightly, adjusting the hidden object, flexing her fingers over it again, and the shadow paused, almost sensing the resolve of someone it could not intimidate. She whispered another tactical word, and the soldiers stiffened, responding silently to the command. Her presence commanded respect and fear in equal measure, and the tent seemed charged with a palpable electricity waiting for the next move. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing, and the medic felt the weight of anticipation press on him, knowing that whatever happened next would reveal the true depth of her past and the hidden power she carried silently for years. The shadow finally moved closer, testing her readiness, and she tensed like a coiled spring poised for lethal precision, her body unbroken and her mind calculating every possible outcome for the confrontation that was about to erupt, and the room fell silent, waiting for the first strike. The shadow stepped closer, and the tension in the tent became almost unbearable. Her eyes locked on its movement, every muscle in her body coiled and ready to react at a moment's notice. The soldiers stiffened around her, following her silent commands, adjusting positions. Instinctively, their breaths shallow and hearts racing. The wind carried distant gunfire and whispers of movement that seemed both near and far, and she listened with a precision that made the medic realize she could hear threats invisible to everyone else. Her hand brushed the hidden object once more, revealing just enough to show lethal intent without exposing full capability. She shifted slightly on the cot, adjusting her weight, her injuries almost forgotten in the presence of immediate danger. The shadow moved again, testing her patience, and she tensed every fiber of her being ready to strike with deadly accuracy. She whispered softly a single word that carried command, authority, and experience, and the soldiers responded immediately, executing maneuvers, as if her will extended through them like invisible strings. The medic watched in awe, understanding that he was witnessing a warrior who had survived countless battles, invisible to history, yet fully alive in her skill and presence. Her breathing remained calm, deliberate, and precise. Each exhale a measure of control and focus that no injury could diminish. The shadow paused, seemingly sensing her resolve, and she did not waver, her eyes narrowing, calculating distance, timing, and probability of every possible outcome. Her fingers flexed over the hidden object again, just enough to reveal readiness and lethal intent without revealing all. She leaned slightly forward, whispering another instruction, recounting a mission erased from records. A mission involving extraction, survival, and rescue when everything had seemed lost, and the soldiers followed her words like lifelines. The tent seemed charged with electricity suspense pressing on everyone as if the next movement could ignite chaos or reveal truth. She shifted slightly again, ignoring the pain in her arm, adjusting the hidden object, and her eyes locked on the shadow outside, calculating every angle. She spoke softly, recounting details of operations only a few had survived. And the medic felt the weight of her experience press down on him, knowing that her injuries were only a fraction of the story. Her presence commanded respect and fear in equal measure, and the soldiers around her moved like extensions of her mind, reacting to silent commands. The shadow made another move, and she tensed every muscle ready to strike or defend with lethal precision. Her fingers flexed over the hidden object one final time, signaling readiness. The soldiers stiffened instinctively, responding to her cues. Her eyes flicked from the shadow to the perimeter and back, calculating every threat, probability, and countermeasure. She whispered softly, recounting yet another story of survival, combat, and endurance. Her voice calm, but words precise and chilling. The medic felt the enormity of what he was witnessing. The combination of skill, experience, and resilience almost too much to comprehend. The shadow stopped moving, and the air seemed to hold its breath the moment suspended between anticipation and action. She tilted her head slightly, flexing her fingers over the hidden object ready to act at the slightest provocation, and then a figure stepped from the darkness into the faint lantern light. Everyone froze. The woman on the cot remained calm, her eyes locking on the newcomer. The medic recognized the signal in her gaze, a recognition, a nod of acknowledgement, and the figure paused, a slight bow before vanishing again, leaving behind an air of unresolved danger. The soldiers turned to her, expecting explanation, and she only smiled faintly, eyes gleaming with secrets and experience could never convey. She whispered softly one last sentence, hinting at missions, ongoing battles yet to come, and the medic understood that the story they had witnessed was only the beginning, that her injuries had told one story, but the true tale of survival, combat, and endurance lay hidden in the mind and skill of someone forged in fire. She finally relaxed slightly, leaning back on the cot, her body still strong, her eyes calm yet aware, and the soldiers and medic around her felt a shift in the room, a mixture of awe, fear, and respect. The shadow was gone. The danger had not fully passed, but the presence of the woman had changed everything, and the medic realized that the history of her battles was not in scars alone, but in the mind, the precision, the endurance, and the will to survive. And when she whispered one final instruction about readiness for the missions ahead, everyone understood that they were no longer witnessing a wounded soldier, but a warrior whose story had barely begun, and the room remained charged with the silent understanding that her past was a legend.